also they advance their technique into the control of semiconductor communication and other technology areas.
Yeah, well, that's right. Why exactly would the CCP be interested in semiconductor technology with the rise of AI and how it uses it to suppress its own people, creating a surveillance state and other things like that?
That's back to 1978, when Deng Xiaoping was still in power. He instructed two sectors, communication and semiconductor will be the two most important sectors China must control. Semiconductor, I think you can say, and Deng Xiaoping has foresight about what's going to happen in the 21st centuries. Today, whatever activities, whatever we are doing, everyone is connected to semiconductor chips. You can avoid that. So if you control semiconductor chips, almost you control everyone's activity, almost you control the world. Communication. We need communication every day. Even this program now, this is communication. We are running a lot of devices, have deep connection to the Chinese, have deep connection using Chinese technology. So we bypassed it, not only for the stealing, but now we cannot bypass anything China has provided to us profoundly.
It's such an important topic for U.S. lawmakers to be aware of and to prevent here. I want to turn to you now, Josh. Speaking to the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, Representative Roger Williams, he's the chairman of the House Committee on Small Business, an economic lever in order to displace the United States.
Well, the Chinese Communist Party has deemed high-tech competition with the United States as kind of its next big domain. They've been, until this point, kind of the cheap manufacturer of the world. That's where they've been stuck economically for a long time. They want to break out of that. And so they have several programs for this. Previous it was Project 863, then it was, the Torch program, others. Even China 2025 was directing from the Chinese government level these operations to steal technology. They use their military for it. In fact, a lot of the hackers that have gotten charged or indicted were actually the Chinese military. What they do is they steal it, they bring it back to China, and then through the different Chinese universities, they actually have established, alongside with the Chinese government, labs where they reverse engineer this stuff and then feed it to Chinese companies. For them, this is a way of competing directly with the West and of stealing the future of American innovation. And then, back on the point of, again, you talked about legal warfare, they'll actually register patents and they'll sue companies for patent infringement, sometimes on their own products. And again, you think, well, it's Chinese courts, how can you compete with that? You can't. They control the courts, they control the legal systems in China, and they use that to shut down foreign innovation. I would actually say that maybe it's $600 billion a year currently, but if you look at the long-term survival, if you look at the long-term life expectancy of products, or of the innovation they're cutting us off from using monopoly, using these things, because they'll basically manufacture products, undercut American companies using the things they stole from them, sue these companies, put these companies out of business sometimes using all these things, and then even buy up those companies. And then they create a monopoly. Then they control the pricing. They use this to control countries. And so it's a huge issue.
Really. Yeah, it's very important to be aware of that. I want to double back in our discussion back here to Jimmy. I want to talk to you more about this alleged spying that's occurring in New York. So what is the advantage that one would get from going ahead and just selling out the United States to China? Well, the court documents allege that that's a $2 million condo in Hawaii, a $3.5 million mansion in Long Island, a new Ferrari, right? So that's what you get. And then also, a dozen of those salted ducks, Nanjing style, prepared by a private chef or a Chinese regime official. Can you give us more insight as to exactly why the Americans across this country should be looking at New York and what's happening there with Chinese influence operations and how it affects their lives?
It's actually more than a dozen. We don't know the exact number of the salted ducks that were sent to Linda Sun's parents, allegedly. But what we do know is that there are significant incentives in play for any politician that is willing to cozy up to pro-CCP proxies in New York. These hometown associations that Josh was talking about earlier can mobilize voters. They can mobilize people to donate to your campaign. And in one of the investigations that's been reported on, there are questions about irregularities in the way that some of
this
these
is how
donations were
Biden got
handled.
elected.
There's allegedly a straw donor aspect to this,
Excuse
where
me,
people were
installed
funneling donations through individual donors who didn't actually recall making these donations, according to local media outlets that reported on this. So there's a big incentive. But the bottom line is that the CCP and its bid for influence in the United States runs through the middle of New York, because here you have a Taiwanese diplomatic presence, you have a significant Chinese dissident community, you have a large Chinese diaspora community here. The party wants to control all of it. It wants to isolate its enemies. As we saw in the indictment, they tried to isolate the Taiwanese and prevent them from engaging with New York state officials. And the basic question that New York officials have to ask is, whose side are you on? Are you going to the Chinese consulate for every event that they're hosting while you're blocking the Taiwanese from engaging with your office? Or are you speaking to dissidents? Are you inviting the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement? And are you standing with people who are persecuted by the Chinese regime? And that's really the biggest lesson from the Linda Sun indictment. It's taking a look at politicians who aren't on the right side of this. Are there people working for them who are steering them in the wrong direction? Or are they ideologically committed or for other reasons committed to aligning themselves with Beijing instead?
Well, Jimmy, you touched on Taiwan. Jason, I want to ask you, for example, what are the Chinese influence operations in Taiwan right now, if there are any, and why should Americans be concerned about those?
Taiwan and China is very complicated relationship, because when we talk about Taiwan, actually 1949, a lot of Chinese moved to Taiwan. The current still powerful Kuomintang still, they was from China, mainland China. So there's a lot of ties between the China and Taiwan. It's very hard to separate. But what we have to learn is about the Chinese strategy, because and in American ways we will say the good cop, bad cop. But Chinese always try to play your friends, your enemy. And Taiwanese people and also people in power in Taiwan will be different. So those people in power in Taiwan, sometimes maybe there's a Chinese palm and they try to use them to influence us. So definitely, and Taiwan-China relationship is intense, but also we have to know the details inside.
Air Force bases, mainly going and destroying the airfield so America can't field its jets. They then take out the satellites, they knock out the targeting systems by doing so of like maybe, missile systems and so on. They knock out the communication systems. The goal for this is to bring America to the negotiating table maybe within a week, according to their own documents. And that would also include, for example, EMP attacks. They call them HEMP attacks, using basically the detonation of nuclear weapons in orbit, which would again knock out the entire American electric grid. And so for the CCP, it sounds like sci-fi, but this is their actual military strategy against the United States. And so protecting the infrastructure that kind of allows, that's kind of the support force that everything else is built on top of. That is one of the big focuses of preventing the CCP from being able to do that.
Well, Josh, thanks for helping us understand this. How
diplomacy or spies or whatever else, the CCP has mobilized everything in an effort to overtake the United States. And I think you're now seeing countries wake up. You're watching the U.S. now taking very strong stances on this. You see Europe now kind of uniting around this, mainly because of the CCP's, no limits agreement with Russia. You even see in the eastern, kind of Asia-Pacific region, Japan is making a much stronger stance, Australia. The world is kind of mobilizing now, in a sense, at least the free world is, because they're recognizing that it's true. The threat from the Chinese Communist Party is the greatest threat we face right now.
Well, Josh, undeniably, and we see this in the human rights abuses in China and what that could mean for the rest of Americans, a canary in the coal mine, what's happening to the Falun Gong, how they're being brutally persecuted and arrested illegally and then having their organs stolen from them and sold in the black market. I want to expand on this theme of unrestricted warfare with you, Jimmy. This alleged spy that we saw in New York, where does it stop? When are we going to wake up to the fact that this might happen again?
So, yeah, Linda Sun is not the only person doing this. And to the point about repression, the Chinese Communist Party's influence operations are directly tied with their efforts to go after human rights minorities and people who are at the receiving end of the party's cruelty and brutality within China. There's this one case 2 years ago where they tried to undermine a congressional candidate. China's Ministry of State Security, which is their espionage agency, had tried to hire someone to take this guy out. They wanted to manufacture a car accident to incapacitate a candidate for the United States Congress because they didn't like his politics. He was a naturalized U.S. citizen who came from China. He was at the Tiananmen Square movement in 1989. And the MSS tried to undermine him and to harm him very severely. So all of this ties together, the repression, the political influence, the efforts to undermine America's political system. So your question of where it ends, we don't know. We're just
Done
learning,
a pretty good job so far, I'd say.
some of the most egregious cases. But I have the sense that we'll probably be seeing a lot more of this in terms of federal law enforcement action in the months and years ahead.
And I think this is very crucial, very important for U.S. to build a relationship with Taiwan. But when we look at individuals, those powerful people, those people control semiconductor sectors, that's different stories. And we learn why we're so powerful, so strong. Why? Because they have relentless support from Taiwanese semiconductor industry, especially the company, the TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. And TSMC and Huawei, they share
quite a few
very
other
high
aircraft
level
that have
technologies. In
crashed.
terminology, we say FinFET and the COWOS. That's two core technologies. TSMC protect them very, very strongly, but they share with Huawei. So from F-16 case, and the U.S. agency has learned Taiwan semiconductor industries, they are not friends, and they are not just and be in the middle, but they believe sometimes they are enemy to the.
Is the United Front and the CCP's infiltration started back in 2008, and at the time there really wasn't anybody exposing it. I was kind of, you mentioned, canary in the coal mine, right? And yeah, they were threatening to kill me for years.
Sorry to hear that.
Including directly surrounding me, several of them, telling me they're going to kill me. I even had a source in one of the Chinese communities in New York who was, giving me information. They told him they hired a hitman to chop off one of his hands, and they actually slashed the tires of his car. And we ended up exposing it. They never did anything with it. But just kind of emphasizing how brazen these agents are, these CCP agents are working in New York. They do things like this. And, the Chinese mafia ties into it as well, because under a lot of these community associations, the Tongs, you have the triads. And so, it's a really vast network.
Yes, absolutely, Josh. And it makes sense that they would target you because the CCP fears the truth. You're constantly reporting on it. We see CCP attacking Epoch Times printing presses in Hong Kong, for example, lighting the place on fire, stealing equipment, just so that the information that people need to know never gets out so they can preserve their international image. And is that something that fits into this broader conversation with how the CCP, like going back to what Jimmy was saying, how they want to manipulate the messaging coming out of the New York governor's office surrounding Taiwan and other things like that that are very sensitive to the Chinese communists?
He was physically assaulted, and an accompanying professor at the college was injured. In March 2018, tenured professor Amy Wax of the University of Pennsylvania School of Law was relieved of some teaching duties after publishing a politically incorrect article. Other organizations, acting under the banner of opposing hate speech, have labeled regular conservative groups as hate groups. In addition, there have been cases of conservative authors and scholars being threatened about speaking at or attending various events. The intrusion on freedom of speech by the left is not part of normal debate between people with differing ideas. Instead, it's about the specter of communism, using people with ill intent, provoking them to obscure the truth and suppress righteous, or at least normal, voices. Political correctness, in essence, is about substituting deviant political and moral standards for righteous ones. It is the devil's thought police.
Thug of an enemy, and he doesn't stop. He just goes on with his threats you will not be able, which means that the war of attrition from his side will continue.
Well, it's a great insight, Yigal Kalman, and people can see more on your website at memory.org. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kinds of areas. So that's kind of what I would expect, but anything's possible at this point.
Now, Lebanon saying today that Israel killed over 490 people, that's including women and children, saying it's one of the deadliest strikes since 2006. Where do you see this conflict heading after this? Is this war between Israel and Hezbollah? What do you make of it?
Well, at this point, I would say where the conflict is heading is a continuous expansion, potentially into Lebanese strongholds where the Hezbollah are hiding. That's specifically the Bekaa Valley. So this is not Israel versus Lebanon. This is Israel versus Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is hiding out almost as its own independent nation, practically inside the Lebanese borders. When I talk to people in Beirut and other
Just
areas
like a
around there,
mosque.
they're actually hoping this does not expand beyond where it has already, but they are perfectly willing to see Hezbollah be destroyed or at least reduced significantly in some way to where they're not such a large part of the Lebanese people's history, culture, and land right now, because they're just a huge risk to them. They actually want to live in peace. So I guess it remains to be seen, but I think to focus on Hezbollah will still take quite a while.
And what does all of this mean for the war in Gaza then?
Well, ultimately, the war in Gaza is continuing to an extent, but largely Hamas has been made irrelevant and destroyed there. Most of the concerns now with Gaza are going to be what happens now, what's next. Israel controls the Philadelphia corridor and various other places, and Hamas has been made largely irrelevant for the most part, except for some of their leadership that's hiding in other countries still. And I think Israel is rightly concerned about the potential threat from the north, moving Israelis back to the north of Israel if something is able to happen there. But Hezbollah is, again, 10 times the size of Hamas and a much greater threat.
And when it comes to the exploding pagers and walkie-talkies last week targeting the Hezbollah group, Israel's president has come out saying Israel was not involved. Now, do you think he's telling the truth? Who else would have that kind of ability to pull off an op like that?
Well, Israel's not always quick to take credit for some of the things they're capable of. And this is just one of those cases.
Well, now the Wall Street Journal is noting that senior White House staff are saying a ceasefire deal in Gaza is out of reach before the end of President Biden's term, but that the administration will continue to work towards that. What do you see as next in the region?
Well, I mean, they're still trying to figure out a way to see if Hamas can come to the table honestly and potentially get some of their hostages back. But I think that's a kind of a dream at this point, not a reality. Unfortunately, we'd love to see them be able to come back alive and reunited with their families, but Hamas and those who deal with them are not honest arbiters in this case. So ultimately, it's going to come down to, I think the next stages down there are going to be what happens to Gaza itself and the people who are left there. Is it something that can be rebuilt? Will they continue to push for a two-state solution from the U.S. and others in other countries, which is a failed solution and always has been? That's my concern right now is the road ahead.
That's
there
what
that
Paris
recreate
wants, a
the problem that
two-state
started there in the first
solution.
place.
It ain't gonna work.
Lieutenant Colonel Darren Gobb, International Military Strategist, thank you so much for joining us.